And thanks to all of you for coming today. Thanks to all of you who are watching online. This is, as you probably know, the third of 3 talks that we are having, considering the Symphony number 3 by Jimmy López Bellido, which none of us has heard yet. But it takes on such interesting topics that in preparation for the world premiere of the piece, which is less than 4 weeks away now, we are discussing all of those issues. We're listening to little bits of the music, and we'll hear a little bit from Jimmy himself about the 2 movements that we'll be discussing today. Laura, if you are with us, I think for those who are new to this discussion, maybe if you could provide us a very brief introduction to this entire project. I know some of us will have heard this before, but for those who haven't, little introduction to where the symphony came from and how the project originated.
Absolutely. Hello, Chris, and hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. And I'm so incredibly excited about this project and this collaboration, and that it's finally going to happen. Like, it's been years in the making, and that we are now a mere few weeks away is really just extraordinarily exciting. So, this comes out of my deep passion for commissioning new works of music. And the reason that I am so geeked about doing that is because one of the greatest functions of art and music is to provide us a mirror of our world. It helps us process our lives, our relationships, the world around us. And so, there's nobody better to do that than composers that are living in the same world that we are. So I've always loved doing that. The other thing that I really love is collaborating. Whenever we collaborate with other institutions, like in this one, it's the Nature Conservancy and also the Nevada Museum of Art. When we collaborate, we make our artistic product bigger and better and multifaceted, and we broaden the reach of what we can do by doing that. So this particular project came out of a conversation I had with David Walker, the president and CEO of the Nevada Museum of Art. And David and I talk periodically. We sit down and it's like, what are you up to? What are you doing? What are your projects coming up in the future? And we were looking for opportunities to collaborate. And as we discussed various possibilities, I was looking at a book on his desk, which was the Altered Landscape Photographic Collection. And I asked him about it. And he said, that's the signature collection that has really put the NMA on the global map, so to speak. So I said, well, this is perfect. This is a perfect thing for us to do because it is about the NMA. It's not a temporary exhibit. We're collaborating on something that is really about what the Nevada Museum is all about. And the other thing that was super attractive to me is this photographic exhibit is all about the interaction between human beings and the natural environment. So it's about our footprint on the earth. It's a super thorny, just sort of charged, troubled issue on one hand, and a really timely and important one on another. And I loved the thought of art being right there in the forefront of being part of this dialogue and finding a way to have impact around the stewardship of the resources that we so value and need for our survival. So that was the photographic collection, the NMA. Then I found Jimmy after years of sort of stalking him and doing, looking at his work. And then we also brought in the Nature Conservancy as our collaborating partner, and here we are.
You managed to latch on to a hot commodity in Jimmy López Bellido. Since he and I have become friends on Facebook, I've been following his career very closely, and he is busy. He was just in Brazil for the South American premiere of his piano concerto. The week before his world premiere with the Reno Phil, he's going to be having his San Francisco premiere with the San Francisco Symphony, of another of his orchestral works. He is busy in terms of cranking out the music and literally traveling the world, bringing it to people.
Yeah, and just a few weeks ago, he was actually in London with the London Philharmonic, and they were doing a premiere of one of his works as well. So he is a big fish, and he is sought after. He's writing for the Philadelphia Orchestra. He's he's got a lot of things, a lot of irons in the fire. And I was a little bit hesitant at first because whenever I pick a composer, I have to do that very, very carefully. It has to be somebody who's going to really fall in love with the subject matter and take it very seriously. But it's also got to be somebody who's going to take the project to heart and really spend a lot of time. And, you don't want to get a composer that is over committed and that's going to just kind of churn out something in a month and not give it a great deal of thought. And I have to say that I have never seen a composer give more of his soul, more of his blood and sweat, and just everything about himself toward this project. He is deeply committed to it. And I have to say that the symphony that he has composed is just so dynamite, and I really feel is going to be very well received. You never want to assume these things, but that's very important to me too, that they're going to write in a manner that is going to work for an audience, yeah, we've come up with a great project from a real genius of an artist.
Yeah. And the starting point for all of this was the collection, The Altered Landscape, at the Nevada Museum of Art. And Claire, this would be a good opportunity to bring you in here. Tell us a little bit about what the collection actually is.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you to the Reno Phil and for Laura for envisioning this partnership. It's really exciting for us to see other people access the artwork at the museum and think about it in different ways than we might think about it. The Altered Landscape collection is a photography collection. We have nearly 3,000 artworks in that collection. As Chris mentioned, it is really the signature and backbone to the museum. And we are oftentimes thinking about the ways that humans interact with the natural, the built, and the virtual environment. The Altered Landscape photography collection exemplifies that. And really helps us consider the ways in which humans interact with the land and all these different kinds of environments. One thing that you'll notice when you see the collection, and we have a few images which you can just kind of scroll through. In the collection, you'll recognize that there's an absence of humans. So while you won't see a lot of human portraiture or human physical bodies in the space, you absolutely can see the evidence that the humans are leaving on the land, the exploration, the commodification, the expansion, thinking about the ways that we might develop the land. And that's something you can very clearly see when you approach the work in the collection. So for us, it was very exciting for Laura to bring the project to the museum, for us to have Jimmy approach the collection and really go through the thousands of images that we have and curate a selection. We always think about the ways that artwork connects and tells stories. And it's great to have somebody from the outside come and approach the images and encourage a new set of dialogue.
Even though the general description of the collection is fairly clear, it encompasses a diverse range. And it's interesting, in fact, that it's called the altered landscape. Alterations can take all kinds of different forms. A garden is an altered landscape. Agriculture is an altered landscape. So some of the alterations are actually benevolent and positive. A whole lot of them, however, are not so much.
Sure. And I think what we're really looking at is the ways that humans interact with the land. And you'll see that realized in different ways. It could be through expansion. It could be through mining operations. It could be, simple like tracks in the landscape. It could be human evidence there. What I found interesting in Jimmy's interpretation was the way that he broke it down into the 4 themes, which is how we've organized the exhibition. So we have followed the themes of the movements, and I want to make sure I have it. So the Great Acceleration, Stillness, Reckoning, and Alignment, which is what we're kind of focusing on today. And it's helped us reconsider the way that we approach the artwork through those 4 themes. So I think he was thinking of it in terms of the composition, and now we're realizing it as an exhibition, and it's informing our interpretation or reinterpretation of the collection.
You were mentioning before we came on that the exhibition is being put up, hung as we speak, and it opens this weekend.
It opens this Saturday, and it will be on view through the end of this year. We have another program that the museum will host on May 6th with Jimmy and with Laura before the performance. But yeah, I got a little sneak peek. Everybody's actively putting things on the wall right now. And I love the work in the Alter Landscape Photography Collection. It's always good to see it on view. And as I said, see the interaction between the different artworks and the conversations that come out of it.
And seeing it to some extent through Jimmy's eyes, his
Absolutely.
specific point of view.
Yeah. And there's very little interpretation in the exhibition, the physical exhibition. We really leaned on Jimmy's words and his interpretation. Our curatorial staff is oftentimes trying to find ways to make the collection translatable to a general audience. And we really pulled back this time. We wanted it to be about Jimmy's interpretation of the work.
Neat. Looking forward to seeing it in
Yeah.
just a few days.
See you on Saturday.
Laura, let me bring you in again just for a moment, because another of the collaborators in this entire project is the Nature Conservancy. Talk a little bit about that collaboration.
Yes, and it's so great to see you, Mauricia. I'm so glad you're here. What we wanted to do was go beyond creating a wonderful piece of music that is about this dialogue and discussing it. That's all great, building awareness, but we wanted to take this project one step further and have tangible impact on, making a difference toward positive stewardship of the Earth's resources. So we decided to partner with the Nature Conservancy because they are global in their reach and because they are so incredibly impactful in the work that they do. And the way that we are working with them, it's about a consortium that will happen after our world premiere. So we do our performance in a few weeks, and then we have been actively working toward pitching this project and promoting this symphony to orchestras around the world. Scott Faulkner has been our lead on those collaborations, and he has been really phenomenal. I think he's reached out to close to 100 orchestras multiple times, and I've reached out to many as well. And we have many that are expressing interest. It's very, very exciting. But what will happen is typically in a situation where you have a consortium, the consortium orchestras will pay a small fee, sort of a rental fee, and that would go to the host orchestra, which would be the Reno Phil. What we're asking all of these orchestras to do is, instead of paying us, they donate directly to the Nature Conservancy, a minimum of $1,000 for each orchestra. So we're very excited. I can't give numbers right now because sort of paperwork and contracts are flying around, but things are looking really promising that we'll have some orchestras jumping in.
It's an exciting collaboration on many levels, one of which, just on the musical level, it's got to be pleasing for a modern composer to have the opportunity to have his work performed not just once at a world premiere or maybe twice, but actually perhaps make its way around the world.
Yeah, this is something that happens all the time. New works are created, they're performed once, and then they go away, and you never hear them again. And it's such a shame. There's so many great things that sort of talk about the tree that falls in the forest. There's all this creative energy that really goes unnoticed because it simply is performed once. So this also helps a composer. And of course, he is established enough that he doesn't exactly need help. He's doing just fine. But I really love the fact that this is something that can help multiple communities connect with their orchestras to their museums. Orchestras are connecting to people that love photography, people that care about the environment, not just people that typically go to a concert hall. So I love having all those different entry points in this particular project that can help orchestras around the world too.
As we're exploring this multifaceted project, we're very pleased to have somebody from the Nature Conservancy with us this afternoon as one of our panelists. Mauricia Baca, who's the state director of the Nevada chapter of the Nature Conservancy. Mauricia, are you here with us?
I am. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate your taking part.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
Let's start on the basics. What does the Nature Conservancy do? What are its activities like?
Well, from the very basic level of the mission of the Nature Conservancy is to conserve the lands and waters upon which all life depends. And our vision is a world where the diversity of life thrives and people act to conserve nature for its own sake and its ability to fulfill our needs and enrich our lives.
And this includes a lot of different spheres, among which would be very prominent ones like climate change and biodiversity and so on. What are the actual activities like out in the world?
Indeed. So the Nature Conservancy, as Laura said, it is a global organization. I'm going to bring us from the global down into Nevada, actually, as well. On the global scale, the Nature Conservancy is engaged with 72 different countries. We have thousands of folks working with us, including over 400 scientists. And the Nature Conservancy has really identified as the driving focus of this decade, the idea of climate and the idea of needing to preserve as much as we can of the lands and waters in the next 10 years. 30% of lands and waters has been the goal. And because of the scale of the organization, collectively, we feel that we can bring all of those parts together to bear. And when I talk about collectively, I talk about as well within the United States, every state has a chapter, and the Nevada chapter has been here in Nevada for about 38 years now. And so we have this global perspective, but then we come in more locally to Nevada and bring in the Nevada specific approach. And at our chapter, we're really focusing on three main initiatives, which is resilient lands, resilient waters, and climate. And everything comes up into those initiatives. But again, really to address this challenge that is facing us in this decade.
Your collaborations are multifarious. You work with businesses, you work with government, you work with indigenous peoples. You're spread all through the state in many different ways.
That is very true. I think the Nature Conservancy, part of what drew me to the Nature Conservancy is its profoundly solutions-oriented approach in that, and actually right before I came to the Nature Conservancy, I was an attorney doing litigation with the Department of Justice and the Environmental Division. And so at that end, you're seeing things when they're very broken. When things come into litigation, they're very broken. The Nature Conservancy likes to take the approach of what can we do to avoid or to minimize and mitigate impacts? What can we do to heal? What can we do to be proactive? And so that's part of what attracted me to the Nature Conservancy is that approach of partnership and collaboration. And so to your point, we collaborate and partner with as many different stakeholders as we can really work with, because all of these issues, I think multifaceted comes in. We're talking about the multifaceted reach of art here in terms of the spoken, what we listen to, what we touch, our senses, and the work of really conserving and making sure that we can engage with as many as possible has to also be multifaceted, because so many are engaged with these really massive challenges that are facing us. No one organization, even an organization at the scale of the Nature Conservancy, can possibly do it on its own.
Are you seeing positive signs in your work over the last few years?
I think the message that comes forward to me right now is there's a moment of challenge, but there is hope. We have seen that when we make decisions to, for instance, conserve forests, to affect actions that produce less plastics, to clean our air, we can see that we can make differences when we make appropriate decisions working well together. So that really is key. And I think here in Nevada, we've made some really great strides in taking actions. Of course, we're an interesting state with so many public lands, but I think the collaborative approaches that have been taken with the federal management agencies, with our state agencies, with our counties, all of our counties now in jurisdictions, many of them are engaged in really assessing what their futures are going to be looking like. I know Washoe and Clark County have both been looking at climate and how to really plan proactively. So to me, that is really the key. It's planning proactively to hopefully, there's this triumvirate in conservation of avoid, minimize, mitigate. You want to avoid impacts. If you can, you minimize them, and then you move to mitigate. But as much as we can do to really find those positive solutions working together.
I was actually listening to a podcast that you took part in, the Compassionate Las Vegas podcast.
Yes.
And you were talking about showing compassion to the planet, the fact that when we're taking care of the planet, we are actually taking care of ourselves. You can put it very well.
Oh, thank you. And I'm so pleased that you listened to that podcast. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's something when you look at music is about emotion. And one way of expressing ourselves and really thinking about this is thinking about this act of compassion. And taking care of the planet is a profound act of compassion. And I think it is an act of compassion to ourselves and an act of compassion to others. One conversation that I've heard that I've found really, really interesting and quite moving to me is the idea of empathy and compassion as well. And that for those who can dismiss climate change and, for instance, the rising oceans, there's perhaps a lack of empathy in this impact of what's going to be happening to those who are going to be experiencing it, or a lack of empathy to the fact that there are rising temperatures in places like right here in our home state, the wildfires, both the humans and the wildlife that are going to be experiencing significant disruptions. So if we can bring to bear that compassion and empathy for those others and for ourselves, I think we can all work together to really accomplish a lot more.
Are you going to be able to stick with us for the entirety of the presentation today?
I would be pleased and honored to.
Thank you, because I would like to return to those very themes you were mentioning, because they're highly relevant to the fourth movement of Jimmy's symphony that we're going to be discussing. One other point I'll make before I turn it back to Laura and we start talking a little bit about music. Do you commonly collaborate with arts organizations?
Yeah. This is I think the Nature Conservancy writ large might have done this, but I don't think we have done as much. We have had some collaborative work with the Nevada Museum of Art. I believe this may be our first collaboration with the Reno Phil. But when this came to me, it resonated so strongly because of the fact that, well, for one thing, for myself, I find a profound connection to visual art and to music. And I think that, as Laura put it so nicely, people come to things in different ways. And if we can bring people together through what they're looking at, through what they're hearing, and if their senses can really combine to open them and have them thinking in new ways, I think that there's really a special opportunity. And I am deeply appreciative of the role that the arts play in our lives. And I am so profoundly grateful that we are able to have here in Nevada such incredible institutions as the Nevada Museum of Art and the Reno Phil that can bring these extra layers of enrichment into our lives.
Thank you for that. Claire, let me return to you for just a second, because we're talking about the connections between music and art. It is true, if I'm not mistaken, that there will be music along with the Altered Landscape presentation, the exhibition that's going to be opening on Saturday.
Yes, so there will be an auditory component to the exhibition, so you can experience some of the movements while you're walking through the gallery space. I think that art provides these kind of visual anchors that tell stories, and I appreciate Laura thinking about what we all think about, which is audience diversification. How do we bring together our community with shared conversations, shared knowledge, increase of knowledge, and really continue to collaborate to bring all of you together in these shared dialogues and shared conversations around some really serious topics. So it's great to have the Nature Conservancy here, and they've been a really good friend of the museums for a long time, and just really wonderful to have this collaboration here represented through this symphony.
Thanks. Laura, I'm going to turn it back to you for just a moment. Dennis and Antoinette, I'm going to be bringing you in very shortly. Don't worry. I haven't forgotten you. But we've been speaking very generally up to this point, Laura, about this project and this symphony. But we're also here to discuss movements 3 and 4 of the symphony. So why don't we begin, once again, for those who haven't been engaged in this conversation up until now, just a quickie look at the first and second movements and what they represent, because the third and fourth movements follow very logically from those. The first movement, for instance, called the Great Acceleration.
So the Great Acceleration, this is actually the longest movement in the symphony. And this one is dealing with the increasing consumption of resources and our consumerism and industrial activity. And specifically, he's looking at from the end of World War II to the present. So it's the movement gets faster and faster, just as it sounds like it would.
A literal acceleration.
Yeah, literally, it accelerates. It's very, very tricky. What's fascinating is that Jimmy did a lot of research leading up to this project, and he actually took graphs of consumption of resources and industrial activity and looked at them and then shaped the movement in exactly the same arc. So, and when you go to the Nevada Museum of Art to see the exhibit that is related to this project, you will see his graphs and his sketches there and how he started. He started literally by just, sketching things like a visual artist would. It's actually super interesting. And it's very tricky for me because I have to hit all these very specific tempo marks that are correlating to this graph. So that's the first movement. It's very exciting. There's definitely some drama and in my mind, a sort of an anxious kind of turmoil to it, but it is very sort of thrilling at the same time. The second movement is Stillness, and this is marking the moment of the pandemic beginning and where all of that stopped. Everything that we did stopped. And this was actually an important moment in the collaboration because there was no guarantee when the pandemic hit that we were going to be able to continue this project and actually make it happen. And many orchestras around the country were canceling, world premieres and canceling commissioning projects because the future was so incredibly uncertain. And Jimmy and I had a conversation where I had told him that I have this wonderful community and wonderful board, and we were going to make it happen. We were going to stick to our guns, and we were just going to put it out a year, but we were going to make this piece happen. But I said, we have to now think of this title, Altered Landscape, with a different lens, with a different meaning. And that is, we now live in an altered landscape. It will never again be the same as it was before. We cannot unlearn and unexperience all that we have experienced in the past couple of years. So, again, if you go back to the beginnings, that art and music is, when you commission something, it is about helping us process. It's helping us look at it in a kind of safe way where everything is a metaphor and it's not too threatening. We can sort of experience that together. We can come together in a concert hall and think about that. So this second movement, Stillness, is a moment where we are isolated, where we are uncertain, where we are anxious. We don't know what's going to happen. It actually has real beauty in it, but it also has these fleeting melodies that begin and then just sort of dissolve and begin again and dissolve. And it has this real sense of longing in it. So that's the second movement. And then here we are at the third movement, which is called Reckoning. And what Jimmy is doing here is he uses a Gayatri mantra. It's a Sanskrit chant as the basis for the beginning of this movement. And he writes it in canon. If you think of row, row, row your boat. You start a melody, then somebody starts it a little bit later, somebody else starts it a little bit later. That's what he does with this melody based on this chant. And it evokes the sense of people being together and chanting. So again, you think we're all in this isolated place, and reckoning is about the transition to action. It is about taking that isolation and anxiety and turning it into a way of understanding, figuring out how and where we're going to move next, how we're going to change, how we're going to adapt, how we're going to move forward. And I think that what he's getting at here is looking at that through both lenses, looking at that, how are we moving forward through the pandemic and just through in our lives, but also, and even more relevant, is with the environment. How are we going to figure out, a way to live sustainably on this planet? And so reckoning, if you look at the works of art in the NMA exhibit, it's a lot about monumentality. That was the word that he described for reckoning. It's in some sense looking inward, taking an honest look inward at what faces us, what we need to surmount in order to coexist on the planet sustainably. And that's, he does that through a meditative thing that then builds into this wonderful, very romantic kind of climax, and then comes to a stop and then begins again. And it's, I think, one of the most beautiful, culminating and romantic parts of the piece.
How about we listen to just a little bit of that music? Since the Reno Phil has recorded some brief snippets of this symphony, we won't hear the entire third movement, but Virginia, if we could watch a video of just a little bit from the third movement. So Laura, contrary to the usual arc of a 4-movement symphony, normally you'd have a fast movement, then a slow movement, and then maybe a dance, a scherzo, sort of upbeat. It sounds to me, this is the first I've actually heard any of the third movement, it sounds like we've got 2 fast movements framing 2 slow movements, very different slow movements, but is that a fair characterization?
Sort of, yes. The stillness movement actually has things that are very, very unstill, very active in the middle of it. But yes, this movement is definitely the slow movement, and the stillness is a little bit more varied.
Then we move on to the 4th movement. We'll discuss the 2 movements and then we'll bring everybody in for a discussion of its themes. But the 4th movement, alignment, just to show, you were talking about the preparation that Jimmy did for the 1st movement in terms of mapping out how the music accelerates. And just to illustrate the kind of brain that we're talking about here, we have a little snippet of Jimmy speaking. He could not be with us today, but Laura and Jimmy and I recorded a podcast, which you can check out wherever you get your podcasts, a long discussion of the symphony and where it came from. And this is a little snippet from that podcast in which Jimmy talks about this 4th movement specifically.
The last movement is the one that where we try to see the light, and we try to envision this hypothetical future where humankind has learned to coexist with the environment. But it is not merely poetic. There's some research that's gone into it. And a few years back, I discovered what are called the Schumann Resonances, not related to Robert Schumann, the composer, but rather electromagnetic frequencies that are generated in the Earth cavity, between the surface and the ionosphere. And so all that activity creates a series of frequencies, the fundamental of which is 7.83 hertz, which translates into a B natural, a very low B natural. When I heard about the Schumann resonances, I just went on to really research about their origins, how they are tracked and measured, and I discovered that they peak at certain frequencies. And so when you gather those frequencies, you come up with a scale. And that scale happens to be the scale that governs outer landscape, the symphony. And what alignment, which is the life movement, tries to do is humans and Earth aligning. How? Because, not coincidentally, I think, our brain waves are synchronized, or can be synchronized with those Schumann resonances. So many of those peaks actually coincide with the alpha or the beta waves of our brains, which means that Earth and humans can actually stay at the same frequency, and I think this is very powerful from just a scientific point of view, but also from a more poetic and it is really it kind of reflects everything that we're talking about.
So Laura, I will ask for your comments after I just continue what Jimmy said with a little bit of what he has written about this symphony, just one sentence. It envisions a world in which we humans have finally reached a level of maturity and awareness that allows us to continue our scientific advances and technological development without damaging the planet that gave us birth. It is filled with the promise of human ingenuity, pointing toward a future where we have finally mastered the balancing act between our individual desires for a better and more comfortable life and the greater good of our fellow human beings and our planet. So in this last movement, we've moved on, we've experienced our reckoning. We have come to terms with what has happened in the past. This is Jimmy's very optimistic view of what the future could hold for us.
Indeed, and musically, it's just these soaring melodies atop these motoric rhythms that come back from the first movement, really. And there is various thematic material clips that come back that have been, throughout the symphony that he brings back and sort of culminates in this wonderful and very uplifting and hopeful way.
Shall we listen to a little of that as well, since we just have another clip? Virginia, could we have the clip from the fourth movement? Some nice drum work from, I think that was Eric Middleton underneath that mask there. Antoinette and Dennis, this would be a good opportunity to bring you into the discussion as well. You've been listening to the themes that we're discussing here, especially for the third and fourth movements. Antoinette, let's start with you. Being the board chair of Nevada Humanities, you're dealing with the various, and it's a whole lot of different themes that the Nevada Humanities deals with. Languages, literature, art, history, archaeology, anthropology, but also from your personal work, One in education. I took a look at your bio and you have an extensive background in bringing educational opportunities out to Nevadans, and as a creator yourself. Share some of your thoughts about what you've been hearing today.
Well, I appreciate every opportunity to represent Nevada Humanities, as it is an organization that brings to Nevadans across the state various opportunities to hear the voices and the artwork and the methods of communication about the things that drive us and the human connections that we make throughout the state and beyond. Quite often, the voices of people from diverse backgrounds is not heard. And this is a great opportunity for us to share viewpoints and support programs like, the Reno Philharmonic and others who delve into viewpoints that are not always aligned with the majority. So it's been my pleasure to represent Nevada Humanities. And as an educator, I think it's wholly important for us to help kids understand and know that as they grow with the world or in the world, that the world sustains them. Quite honestly, we have not had, and this is from my Indigenous viewpoint, we have not had a respectful relationship with the earth. And that comes just from my own experiences and how I see things through Indigenous eyes in a lot of respects. Several months ago, I wrote a piece to honor Nevada Day, and I wanted people who read the piece to understand there's an inherent need in the Indigenous belief system to give thanks for the earth, the air, the animals that make up nature, the animals that live in nature, the ground, and how beautiful it is and how well it sustains life on this planet. And if we continue down the pathway of usurping the resources without regard for the impact that we make on the earth, we will have some challenges, and we're beginning to deal with those currently, as Mauricia had mentioned regarding her work with the Nature Conservancy. If we cannot come to terms on how we want our grandchildren to live in the future, we will certainly not exist on this planet. And as I've heard other people say, the earth doesn't need us to survive. We need the earth for us to survive and all the living things upon it. And every day we hear in the news, we hear in reports, we read about reports where another species has died, where another catastrophic weather event has happened and people are losing their place where they have historically lived and thrived. If we think about Nevada for just one moment, we are the most mountainous state in the Union. We have rich valleys and mountains where so many beautiful things exist. Yet we have done some horrendous things to those mountains so that we can obtain the resources from those places. And as a result, we've engaged in behaviors that are messing with the ecosystem. What drives that? It seems that we are in a mad dash for the last resource on Earth and trying to, in another 100 years, if we're still here, there will be no quality of life. There's an author that wrote this article about commons areas. Commons areas are fast disappearing. Our free air, unpolluted air, our fresh water, open spaces, unpolluted and free of any kind of human mark are going away, and they're disappearing rapidly. And I applaud the work of the Nature Conservancy for trying to save those spaces, because it is so critically important for people in the future to survive, and even the animals to survive. Animals are displaced every day because we are encroaching on their space. And then when we encroach on their space, if something happens, then those animals are extinguished because we think our lives and our lifestyle is better and more valuable than theirs. And I hope and pray that we will at some point reach this alignment. I don't believe we've completely atoned yet for the things that we have done that have changed our world in such drastic ways. I believe that in the future, if we come to evaluate what we're doing in a more thoughtful way and try to come to understand the long-term effects of our action, avoid some catastrophic changes in our world. We as humans are very ingenious. I think about all of the things that we collectively as human beings have created. And I believe that if we are that ingenious, we can use that ingenuity to reverse our behaviors, acknowledge the fact that we must change, and find ways to salvage where we live. Honestly, there is no other place for us to go, correct? We have no other place that will sustain us and sustain our ways of life. I think as we move forward, that we have to collectively do to, I hope, make it so that this earth will sustain life.
Thank you for that. Implicit and actually explicit in what Jimmy López Bellido is talking about with the fourth movement. One, I'm not going to pretend to be smart enough to understand the Schumann Resonances and all of the implications of them. His brain works on a slightly different level than many of us. But implicit in all of that is a theme that you find in lots of spiritual traditions, which is the idea that the separation that seems apparent between us and the earth is an illusion, that we're actually all one. And Jimmy says with the Schumann Resonances at a very basic sort of vibrational scientific level, we may all in fact be one. But he also makes explicit in the little bit of his text that I quoted, we're talking about us reaching a level of maturity and awareness that allows us to continue our scientific advances and technological development. So it's not as though change is going to happen out there somewhere and we just watch it happen. We're the ones that individually have to make choices and make it happen. Which leads me to you, Dennis, because you are engaged sort of in the front lines in a technology that is going to be probably very much a part of any solution that we find to the problems that we're talking about. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
Sure. Thanks for having me here today.
Thank you, and thank you for being patient.
No problem at all. I'm going to strike a decidedly more hopeful tone here, because I think that where we are right now as a species is kind of an inflection point. We've been living, at least in the first world, we've been living a fantastic lifestyle, and we've done so because of technology, because of a lot of innovations that have happened that allow us to do things like this and have meetings over the internet. And we can travel all over the world on airplanes, and we can travel easily to visit loved ones. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing that we get to live this lifestyle. However, it's important that we understand how to do so sustainably. And if you ask me my opinion of one of the tragedies in all this is we've developed a lifestyle that is very energy intensive, and the best way to make energy is to burn stuff. And burning stuff does bad things like increase global temperatures and causes ocean acidification and causes air pollution. And, you know, basically, we're going to have to figure out how to get all this energy without burning stuff. And if I can throw a couple numbers out at you, humans today use on the order of 24 terawatt of energy at any moment. 24 terawatt, not megawatts or gigawatts, but terawatts. And that's a lot of stuff to burn to get that energy. As it turns out, the sun provides 100,000 terawatts of energy to Earth at any moment. So if we could, instead of burning stuff, harness the energy that the sun gives us, that the wind gives us, which is associated with the energy that the sun gives us, we'd be in much better shape. The reason we don't do that now is because the sun goes down at night, the wind dies down, clouds go by. These sources of energy are intermittent. So the limiting factor in all this is energy storage. And there's a lot of different ways to store energy, but if you really want to make a very big dent, you have to have storage everywhere, because the sun shines everywhere, the wind blows everywhere. You have to have storage available everywhere. So my personal view, I envision a world where you have basically storage in every building, a large battery system, for example, in every building, which is what I do. I started a battery company here in town called Dragonfly Energy. I'll give a little bit about my background. I have a PhD in environmental engineering. I was a professor for 12 years studying how to understand how burning fossil fuels cause climate change. How does it affect cloud formation? How does it affect light scattering, that sort of thing. And throughout my career, there's always been this sort of perceived uncertainty of the fact that the climate was warming because of man-made activities. In the scientific community, there was zero uncertainty. So it got to be a little bit frustrating to have to convince people, no, this really is happening. This is a man-made thing. And so it really did encourage me to leave academia and try to do something that I thought was the most effective way to address this problem, which was more energy storage so we can use more sun and wind.
Well, along the lines of what you're talking about, I'm not sure if this is amusing or not exactly, but I'm sure you saw that just a few days ago, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the last part of its report, the IPCC. And somebody pointed out to me that when this appeared in the Los Angeles Times a few days ago, if you looked at the front page of the actual physical LA Times, you wouldn't actually see anything about the report, but down in the corner, they had a little sidebar pointing to stories elsewhere in the newspaper. And I wrote it down because it was so good. Down in the corner of the lower corner of page 1, you would see Earth on track to be unlivable. Global warming will surpass tipping point unless greenhouse gas emissions fall fast. Story on page 3. I guess we should be grateful that it appeared as early in the paper as page 3, but you would think a headline, Earth on track to be unlivable, might get a little of our attention. But looking at the actual contents of that report, while there is some dire news in it, there are also some hopeful notes. And the kind of technology that you're talking about, tell me if this is an incorrect or correct statement. The technology to really harness the kind of power from solar and from wind exists right now. Is that a true statement?
Yes. But it's expensive. And so
that was going to be the next part of my question.
Yeah, that's really the bottom line is cost. And, you know, we've got to be able to afford how to implement these things. And it has to do with manufacturing and, you know, to the point about Earth's resources, we still need resources. We still need, for example, lithium out of the ground. We still have to do stuff that is not perfect in order to sustain this lifestyle, or we just don't have this lifestyle.
Right. The batteries that your company creates are based on lithium. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. But they are much more environmentally friendly than the typical battery source.
Yeah, they are. So there's different types of lithium batteries. Some have other components that require more mining or that are toxic, like nickel and cobalt.
Right.
And so we're focused more on storage batteries that are more suited for long-term storage rather than driving an electric car. So driving an electric car requires a much more a much lighter battery than you necessarily need for energy storage for grid applications. What we're more interested in is a battery that lasts so long that over its lifetime, it's cheaper than burning coal.
Yeah.
And that's really where we're headed.
But the technology is there. It's a matter of affordability, and then dissemination is going to be a bit of an issue too, because some of us will be able to afford this technology right off when it's becomes available, but it needs to get out to the entirety of the world, right?
That's why you want to make it affordable or more affordable for a utility company to apply this solution than to build another coal plant.
Right. Do you see that happening? Well, you were saying earlier that you had a basically optimistic point of view that you wanted to share. Does that remain true? Looking to the future, do you see this revolution happening? in the time-sensitive fashion that it needs to?
Well, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't think it would happen. So yeah, I do see it happening. There's always uncertainties, which is why the IPCC puts out these reports where they try to estimate, based on how much fossil fuels we continue to burn, what will be the ramifications, specifically not just global temperature, but extreme weather events and everything that that causes problems for people. And that's difficult to predict.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think you have to think about it as a black or white issue. I think the sooner we get it done, the better off we're going to be. Yeah. So we're working as hard as we can.
I would like to open this discussion up to anybody who would like to join in, any of our panelists, but we've been talking about some very specific issues. Jimmy raises some really interesting and very important issues in his symphony, but there is no actual text in the symphony. It's absolute music. And I'm kind of curious what role, one, music and the arts, but also too, because Jimmy makes this point again and again in talking about the symphony, the role that education is going to play for us going forward in terms of making right decisions and then seeing what's happening around us and having artists and writers and historians and others make sense of it for us. Speaking broadly in those terms, anybody like to toss in some thoughts?
Chris, in terms of, I mean, this is exactly the kind of thing that Jimmy and I are trying to do, is a sort of draw attention to an issue, build awareness, and throw some sort of talking points and things out there for people to chew on, and begin to broaden their own education about particular things, or to spark their interest enough to go and look into things further. It has been so wonderful for me to, look at, first of all, in terms of the art, in terms of the photographs, the Altered Landscape collection, I now have a deep fondness for this collection because of poring over the photos in this process, and the ways that they have sort of opened my heart and mind to these issues is really substantive. There are so many photographs that are incredibly thought-provoking, and that are really impactful. They really make you feel things, and sometimes it's sort of a bleakness, sometimes it's a wonder of beauty, sometimes it's humor. I mean, it's just like all over the place. But I have been really grateful for the way that I have experienced that work of art, and how it has sort of opened my own mind and made me think about things and then go look into them. And then, of course, working with Jimmy, and learning about the Schumann Resonances, and even about the chant and things like that he brings into this, looking at the charts of the research that he brought into the project, talking to Bill Fox at the museum with all of the research that he has done. I've learned a ton, and I feel like this whole project has really benefited me quite a lot. And I hope that some of that will come through to everybody else who listens and goes to the museum and encounters this work of art.
Thank you, Laura. We've taken kind of a deep dive on this symphony. We've spent now roughly 3.25 hours talking about a symphony that we haven't heard yet. But I hope that the issues that Jimmy has raised and that we've raised in these panel discussions, one, make you excited about hearing the work and hearing what Jimmy has to say about this in musical terms, but also pursuing the trains of thought that he has. He's made a lot of suggestions for us. And going forward, I hope that you'll be able to take advantage of the information that you have gleaned from these various panel discussions we've had. We've reached the end of the time for the actual talk, but if any of you would like to make comments or ask questions, I'm not going to run around with a microphone. Apparently there are microphones that will pick up what you have to say. If you have a question for any of the panelists or a comment on anything, that would go for online listeners as well. Yeah, Catherine.
I have a question for the gentleman from, is it Dragonfly? I understand there's some disadvantages to lithium, but that there is possibly some development of alternative substances that don't have, that can do batteries without starting fires and have some other advantages. Are you aware of any of this?
Yes, batteries, lithium batteries are flammable because of the liquid electrolyte that's inside it. It's a highly flammable organic compound. And clearly that would not be something I'd be in favor of putting an excess amount of in people's homes. So actually what we are working on at Dragonfly is replacing that liquid electrolyte with a solid electrolyte that is non-flammable. So I did not mention that, but that's sort of what makes it a distributable home solution.
So the research and development is ongoing.
It has been ongoing now for quite some time, and we're in the process now of building a pilot production plant.
Nice. Any other comments or questions?
So here in Reno, we're going to have a collaboration with the Museum of Art and the Symphony and the Nature Conservancy. And Laura, you mentioned that we're going to, I know we're going to be sending this, or other orchestras, probably quite a few orchestras throughout the country and possibly the world will be listening to it. Are we going to somehow encourage or share like the photographs from Altered Landscape with these other symphonies in other cities, that so that they can also do a collaboration with their museum, whatever it is, as well as trying to tie in the local, nature conservancies and whatever?
I know that we have been in discussion about traveling the exhibition with the symphony. So that's something that Laura and our team is very aware of and all has the intention of doing. It may not work out in every venue or every city, but certainly we would like to complement the symphony with the exhibition. So that is our intention. If we can make that happen. The great thing is that these works are in our permanent collection. They're very accessible to us. Fiscally, it's very easy for us to travel these photographs. So it's not a high cost installation for other organizations to absorb. We just have to have partners in these cities who are willing to have the exhibition, understand the intention, and then also the Philharmonics that are there also understand the big story.
Right. And, I think one of the strengths of this project is the flexibility that it has. A community may opt to mount an actual physical exhibit in their art museum. If that is not a possibility, then there are the digital images, which can be displayed as part of the performance. And we will do that in the hall. So as you come to hear the world premiere, you will actually see the pictures before each movement. And that will be an option for orchestras to do as well. And then if an orchestra doesn't have screens, doesn't have access to that, or doesn't want to deal with it in any way, they can also perform the piece just as the piece. So I think that this kind of flexibility is really great. And I know that a lot of people are really a lot of orchestras are going to opt to use the photos. I'm certain whether they do it physically or digitally, I think will just depend on their situation.
Other questions or comments from anyone? Yes, sir.
Will there be an audio recording of Altered Landscape available, preferably on CD?
That would be such a lovely thing if we could just and we do talk about perhaps making a recording of the pieces that we commission in the future. I can tell you that we will be live streaming this, and we'll capture the audio and visual recording as we are doing the world premiere. That will be available for a time on demand. So if you want to go back and experience it again, or you want to send it to your friends, they can experience it. And I think that that's available for like a month afterwards. I think also that our performance is going to live online in some way for a period of time. I don't know exactly what the arrangement there is, but it will be available that way. And perhaps in the future we can make an official CD recording. Nothing would excite me more.
That would be excellent. Other comments, questions? We're near the end of our time, but we do have time for maybe one more. Well, I think we may be at the end then. So thank you, all of you, for coming today, and all of you who are listening in online. Here in person, Claire and Dennis, thank you very much for taking part. Online, Laura, of course, thank you so much. Mauricia and Antoinette, thank you for taking part. It's been great, and please be at the Pioneer Center actually in about 3 weeks to hear Beethoven's Ninth, but then in 4 weeks to hear the world premiere of the Altered Landscape Symphony. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks to you, Chris. Fabulous.
Thank you, Laura.
Appreciate it.